Pig guts, rocks, and even buckets of human sewage rained down like a medieval storm. Blood oozed from a woman's head as she writhed in agony, her neck locked in a merciless grip. Around her, the mob's roars grew louder, braying for more punishment, more pain, and more vengeance. And in the Middle Ages, one thing was certain: you really didn't want to upset the mob. It's going to get a lot worse for this woman and some law-breaking men on today's episode of The Infographic Show. The most brutal punishments in the history of mankind, the neck violin. Right now, some of you are probably thinking, what exactly is a neck violin? Well, it's like this. In the Middle Ages, if you did something wrong and you outraged the public, one of the punishments was public humiliation. For instance, in France, if a wife cheated on her husband, she might have been made to run the gauntlet through the street. To make the humiliation complete, she would hold a string connected to her lover's undercarriage. All the while, the people threw things at them. Historical documents show that this was called la course, the run. Sometimes the couple was beaten by the mob who were waiting at a crossroads. Back in the 1500s, entertainment was limited, so a good day out for the family might involve attending a public humiliation. If they were outraged and offended, they screamed at wrongdoers in the street. Sometimes those wrongdoers were strapped into a device called the neck violin during what was a long walk of shame. The crime that landed some in this cruel device might have been as trivial as spreading gossip. If the person had committed a more serious crime, their walk of shame was just the beginning of their punishment. The neck violin was most commonly used in Austria and Germany, but most of Europe had a similar device that also served as a means of public humiliation. The onus was on tying up a person's hands and exposing their head, making them vulnerable to an attack from a rotten turnip or something much harder and capable of causing serious injury. But the neck violin didn't have to be a solitary punishment. There was a double version where you could strap in two people and send them off down the street to face an angry mob. This could happen to two guys who'd been reprimanded for fighting in the village alehouse over a stolen chicken. The duo could just as easily be husband and wife who annoyed everyone with their constant bickering. So public humiliation days were actually quite common. The contraption, both the single and the double, was very basic. It was made up of two pieces of wood that were joined by a hinge. There were 3 holes once it was locked together, one big for the neck and 2 small ones for the hands. Sometimes there was a bell attached. When the bell rang out, it was your cue to grab the nearest rotten vegetable or even a bucket of sewage and prepare for the condemned to shuffle past your door. How much you decided to hurt this person would depend on what they'd been charged with. For women, the crime worthy of the neck violin could be as simple as talking too much, nagging, or spreading gossip. And that's why it earned the grim nickname the Shrew's Fiddle. In those days, the term shrew was a label slapped on any woman seen as unpleasant, argumentative, or ill-tempered, or all the above. It didn't take much to cross that line. To our 21st century ears, that sounds pretty extreme, but the condemned woman might have also been charged with more serious crimes, such as theft or infanticide. In this case, the neck violin could have just been the start of her punishment. And make no mistake, a male criminal who'd committed a similar crime would be treated just as bad or worse. Back then, the neck violin was about as good as it got. But yes, the practice was often misogynistic by today's standards. Take, for instance, the scolds bridal, which seems to have been invented in Bonnie, Scotland in the mid-16th century. It was essentially used for the same thing as the neck violin, to humiliate a woman, also known as a scold or a nag. The victim could sometimes be sentenced to just a few hours on the scold's bridle after the sheriff had told the townsfolk to do their worst to her. These devices became all the rage in the rest of Britain, eventually making it over to the colonies in the New World. It proved useful for communities where they often took a zero tolerance to crime or breaches of morality. The records show women were subjected to these punishments for running out of control and not doing as their husbands had told them. Some challenged priests or the laws of the town. For a woman who gossiped or nagged, she was given the scold's bridle, although they called it the branks. Some of the branks were fitted with an iron spike that pierced the tongue. Another punishment was the pillory, a stationary version of the neck violin, which in the Jamestown colonies was sometimes referred to as the stretch neck. According to historical records, the pillory wasn't reserved for just the most heinous crimes. A newspaper at the time listed off offenses including sedition, arson, blasphemy, witchcraft, perjury, wife-beating, cheating, slandering, conjuring, fortune-telling, and even drunkenness. For many, the humiliating walk of shame in a contraption like the neck violin was merely the opening act before being locked in the pillory. People, described in the documents as cheerful, were invited to throw things at the condemned. If that person had upset the community, the things thrown were often rocks. There were many cases in history of the person dying. They could also lose their ears, especially the men. In 1648, a man named John Ganeri, convicted of perjury, was, quote, nailed by both ears to the pillory, 3 nails in each ear, and the nails to be slit out and whipped 20 good lashes. This was weekend entertainment for the masses. But there were plenty of times the townspeople took pity on the victim. Take the case of Dorothy Wow. Before heading off to the New World, she was a resident of Carlisle in England. Because she was a Quaker, she was accused of spreading, quote, ungodly practices around town and deemed a threat to the social order. The mayor of Carlisle ordered that she be placed in the pillory in the middle of the marketplace. It was going to be 4 hours of public humiliation. She was sent back to jail and taken out again, after which she was whipped and chased out of town. But no one screamed obscenities at her or threw stuff at her. The mayor's plan backfired. Everyone felt sorry for Miss Wow. Things could get far worse. Take James Naylor, an English Quaker who in 1656 decided to reenact Jesus Christ's entry into Jerusalem by riding a horse into the city of Bristol. It did not go over well. Accused of blasphemy, Naylor was sentenced to the pillory, a punishment that was just the beginning. The authorities branded a searing bee onto his forehead, pierced his tongue with a red-hot iron, and handed him over to an angry mob. The crowd didn't hold back, delivering a brutal beating that nearly cost him his life. But what was it like for someone who suffered such a public humiliation? They would often be paraded through town, confined in a neck violin. The town square would be packed. Public humiliation days, often market days, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Saturdays, and especially feast days and saints' days, were always busy. People would travel from outside of town to sell their wares. If a witch was going to be punished, there was often a carnival atmosphere in the air. If you'd had back-breaking work in the fields as a laborer, now was the time to take out your anger on someone under an official sanction. On March 5, 1751, in Hatton Garden, London, Egan the shoemaker and Salmon the breeches maker stood accused of what one newspaper dubbed a diabolical conspiracy. Their scheme? Acting as so-called thief-takers, they lured young boys into stealing for them. They would betray the children by turning them in for a reward. The cost of their greed was staggering. Several innocent people were executed because of their actions. The crowd jeered as the 2 men were paraded through town and locked into the device. What a newspaper described as them being severely treated was them being, quote, pelted with stones, brick bats, potatoes, and other things. As you can imagine, the mob was furious. The boys who were set up no doubt had relatives in that crowd. The constables jumped in and tried to protect the condemned men, but the crowd overpowered them. The report said the offenders were left wholly to the mercy of an enraged mob. After half an hour, the men were groaning, barely conscious, when a member of the crowd calmly walked up to Egan and bashed his head in with a stone, and he, quote, immediately expired. But it gets worse. Imagine if you were totally innocent. You could walk down the street in a neck violin as everyone screams obscenities at you. Little kids smear dog excrement on your face, running away laughing. Bigger kids throw a dead chicken in your face or wrap entrails around your neck. This happened to 8 women in Ireland in 1711 who were all accused of witchcraft and sent to the pillory. The records show the mob was, quote, much exasperated against these unfortunate persons who were severely pelted with boiled cabbage stalks and the like, by which one of them had an eye beaten out. Something similar happened in 1680 to a woman named Elizabeth Cier. She was a good person, a midwife. She advised girls on women's rights, yet in her era she was a menace to society and accused of treason and later libel against the king. A report on what happened to her explained that she had been hauled out of her bed, placed in the stationary neck violin, and struck with stones by the rabble. She was beaten senseless in the morning and pulled out again in the afternoon, her face bloodied and swollen. The angry mob was given 1 more hour. The sheriff's officers, watching how severely this poor woman was being treated, stepped in to shield her. Reports state she had been grievously bruised and several officers had been wounded in her defense. Even stopping the mob was also dangerous. Remarkably, she endured this brutal treatment not once, but 3 times and lived to tell the tale. She then went on to publish a controversial pamphlet that valued midwives' practical experience more than the theoretical knowledge of male physicians. She also called for the creation of the Royal College of Midwives, laying the groundwork for a revolution in women's healthcare. So, what have we learned today? Don't mess with the mob. Ever heard of a punishment as bizarre as the neck violin? Think you could endure it? Share in the comments. Now you need to watch why STDs in the Middle Ages were even worse than today. Or click on this video instead.